Hi, so today I wanted to take a few minutes just to talk through Girl by Jamaica Kincaid with you. And this is really just going to be an introduction, just like we had for your previous story. So, Jamaica Kincaid was born in 1949 and she's still currently living and writing. She was born, however, as Elaine Potter Richardson. She later changed her name, which we'll talk about in just a couple of moments. She was raised in poverty on the Caribbean island of Antigua, and much of her work really takes place in exploring in Antigua and exploring this Caribbean culture. She took her name from a character from a George Bernard Shaw play, and she took this name to spite her mother. From 1976 to 1995, she was a regular contributor for The New Yorker. If you're not familiar with The New Yorker, it's a really highbrow publication. It's a big deal to be a contributor or even be published in The New Yorker. Her works include At the Bottom of the River, The Autobiography of My Mother, Mr. Potter, and My Brother. She's currently a professor of English, African, and African American Studies in residence at Harvard. All of this should really help cement that Jamaica Kincaid is a literary force. She has many published works. She works for Harvard. She has been published in The New Yorker. And she really is a writer that people are listening to, that people care about. Her work is often fiction and often based on the truths of her own experiences, but they're fictionalized. Lots of times you hear writers or people who write or think about writing say things like this: write what you know. In other words, you draw on your own personal experiences for your writing. Many writers do this. With Jamaica Kincaid, her work is really heavily based on her own life, but we cannot assume that her characters are her. They are fictionalized versions of something similar to what she might have experienced. Kincaid's strained relationship with her mother is evident in many of her works. In Girl, we'll see this very heavily as it shows us a relationship between a mother and a daughter. Again, we don't know that it is Jamaica Kincaid's relationship with her mother, but we can assume that she's drawing on some of those experiences. This strain became particularly evident when Kincaid's three younger brothers were encouraged to attend college, but Kincaid was not, simply due to her gender. For Kincaid's mother, the expectation was that Jamaica Kincaid would do the womanly duties. She would run a house, she would find a man, and that would be what was expected of her. And yet her brothers, who were all younger than her, were expected to get an education, and this really bothered Jamaica, and as a result it really caused this huge strain between mother and daughter. Her works often focus on matriarchy. Matriarchy is the motherhood, the mother figure that runs a family. Colonization. Antigua is colonized by the English, and there's really this kind of conflict between British Antigua and Antiguan culture as a result of how to say this, as a result of just what was indigenous, the indigenous people of the culture. So those of British descent versus those of true Antiguan descent, and how those two things come into play with each other. In the story, we'll hear the characters reference church, which is an English institution, and calypso music, which is a very Caribbean, indigenous Caribbean idea. And we kind of see how these two forces are juxtaposed and are in conflict with each other. We also see in Kincaid's work this real commentary on gender stereotypes. With gender stereotypes, she's looking at what's expected of young women, and additionally, maybe what's expected of young men. Or if it's not expected of young men, why? Why are we expecting one thing of one gender and something totally different from the other gender? And then if we are expecting two different things, is that okay? Or how should we feel about that? So we're really meant to kind of question all three of these ideas: matriarchy, colonization, and gender stereotypes, asking why are things the way they are, and how should we maybe approach these ideas moving forward? This work is an example of postmodernism, which is a literary period beginning at the end of World War II, continuing to today's contemporary writers. The writing during this period is characterized by experimental style and a playfulness on the part of the writer. Writers often rely on techniques such as fragmentation, paradox, and metafiction. These works often include irony, playfulness, black humor, and magical realism. We see a lot of this in we will see a lot of these elements in many of the things we read this semester. I made a point of pointing out postmodernism to you because it really does encapsulate a lot of what we will be reading. Both modernism and postmodernism are the two areas we're really going to be in. And with postmodernism, we really do see our writers kind of playing a little bit more with their writing. We see them using a lot of irony and some black humor. And we see this thing called metafiction. In Snow, when you read that, you saw how Beatty kind of comes into the work and she points out things like, okay, and now this for the drama. And she tells us something that's dramatic. Or she says, and this is a story how you say a story should be told. So we see her kind of coming into the story and commenting on the fact that she is writing a story, that this is an artificial thing. So metafiction is something we see a fair amount from this type of literature. We see this in Girl, this playfulness, in the fact that Girl is one sentence long. It's one really long run-on sentence. It works as both a story and as a piece of poetry. It's lyrical like poetry, and it's very condensed like poetry. It's also called flash fiction, short fiction, but it's also telling a story. Girl was published in 1978 in The New Yorker, and it operates as a piece of flash fiction as well as a prose poem. It's written as a continuous run-on sentence and employs repetition and a poetic rhythm. The story tackles the issues of family relationships and their effects on individuals, mother-daughter dynamics, and gender stereotyping. So a lot of those things that we've kind of been talking through already are the things that we're going to see in this work. Once you've read the work, you will move on to the discussion. In a couple of days, I will post another video kind of breaking down and unpacking the story a little more for you after you've had time to read the story and come up with some ideas on your own. Good luck, and if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me.